Alrighty, we are recording. Welcome everyone to the Ape podcast, where we bring together responsible citizens and Americans just to have conversations and, talk about the state of affairs and talk about good ideas, bad ideas, what our opinions are, what we believe is going on in the country, and ideas to, hopefully improve the future of America. But sitting here with my longtime friend, Mr. Josh Bell. How you doing?
Good. Thank you for having me, man.
Of course, man.
Glad to be back.
You got a T-shirt on this time, flashing the tattoos for the audience. I appreciate that. How's everything been over the past? Last time we chatted was Ape Podcast Discussion 11, and this is Ape Podcast Discussion 22.
Damn.
So been some good progress so far.
Yeah. So I think since the last time we talked, I just had a couple buddies that competed in a bodybuilding show. I haven't filmed anything yet because we're right now. One of my friends, I'm supposed to film for him later on in the year because he has a competition at the end. Mm-hmm. But so it was really cool for me to experience like the prejudging, to see how it kind of works, how they do first call outs, second call outs, how that whole process goes. Cause this is all brand new to me.
Yeah.
And
then you just got into it. I mean, you've been working out for a while clearly, but
yeah.
You just got into the actual competition and stuff within the past year and a half, 2 years.
Exactly. So, I mean, it's all brand new to me and it's really cool. I didn't know that, like, even with these amateur shows, a lot of this is all out of your pocket. So, you're not even making money until you get your pro card. So,
yeah.
But it's really cool though. It's a really cool process. It's definitely fun to put yourself out there. But yeah, no, I've enjoyed it. I've even been nervous from the being behind the scenes. So just filming through, or knowing that I'm going to be filming my buddies' journey through this is a little nervous, but it's really cool because then I get to kind of see what I'm going to be going through like in the near future when I do decide to step on stage.
Yeah.
So.
And I feel like what's been new with, the world in general, but especially with bodybuilding is like, it's a massive online presence these days, right? Like with Instagram, TikTok, all that stuff. So you're just kind of figuring all that part out.
Yeah. And just even trying to find my own niche as far as what type of content I want to put out for like people. Cause I feel like now at this point, everybody's kind of touched on everything as far as like the diets, the workouts. So I want to find something more specific to me and that I could offer to as far as advice, or even maybe from a videographer's perspective as far as just filming or documenting the whole process for any other people who want to, maybe because there's a big demand for videographers or editors for some of these people who are planning on competing, because a lot of them want to document the process. But you got to remember, you're worried about your diet, your posing, all these other things. So the last thing you care about is filming your whole process. So you'd rather outsource that to somebody else where they're just handling that. So if I can offer that type of maybe help to somebody else, or somebody who's just getting into filmmaking and wants to get some experience, I'd love to maybe offer some help with that down that. But speaking of TikTok and stuff, did you see the that whole, I think it's happened a couple of months ago, that incident at Planet Fitness with the transgender woman?
Yeah.
What were your thoughts on that? Like honest, like,
yeah.
How'd you feel about that?
I've been pretty vocal on this stuff for the past, few months. And I think it's one of those things where a lot of people don't know a lot about some of the, downsides to the kind of transgender ideology, let's say. One, because of, I think, a lot of media misinformation, right? Two, I think it's such a taboo subject where people feel like when they talk about it, they're immediately going to get canceled.
Dude, that doesn't exist, bro.
Yeah. Well, I was talking about this on my last discussion, because it was like, I still have people today who, I'm a big Jordan Peterson guy. And I always have people today who's like, oh, isn't he like a transphobe? And it's like, Jesus Christ. It's like, you haven't listened to anything that the guy's saying, So it's one of those topics where if you say anything even critical about it, you can, the social justice warriors come out and they're immediately bashing on your content or trying to, DM you crazy death threats. And, fortunately, nothing crazy has come to me yet, but I've only been posting clips of other people talking about it, just trying to stay up to speed. And, if I see something crazy out there, I try to share it with my audience because I think it's important. But, long story short, with the whole Planet Fitness thing, I'm pretty sure it was something where a biological man, says, well, I identify as a woman, so I get to use the women's restroom. And then I believe went in there and was like showing his thing to people. And
he was
asking people to.
I guess he was grooming too. And there was a 12-year-old that was in like the corner sitting, and a woman came in there, and then she saw him, took a picture of him, and then she got her membership revoked.
Yep.
Because she went against the phones or cameras in the locker room policy.
Yeah.
But my thing is, although, like, again, if that was my daughter, I would be extremely pissed.
Yeah.
But then when I thought about that, I was like, oh, if that was my daughter, where were her parents? Like,
True.
That, again, she was 12 years old. So one of the gym policies is you're not supposed to have unaccompanied minors if you bring them into there. So that was another thing where I do kind of see that perspective. But again, it is a taboo or touchy subject because I think whatever gender you were born with, those are the bathrooms you should. For like a general sense is like which.
Yeah, and I think like one of the, and I completely agree with that too, right? And it's like one of those things where like, I know trans people, right? There's clearly, normal trans individuals out there. It's, it's been kind of labeled as a disorder for a long time. It's something we knew about. Most of those folks, especially before 2012, 2015, that's really when like the social justice movement popped out, and and those are more the activists, right? But before 2012, people understood that gender dysphoria existed, and it was like you talk to these people and they're fully aware that they were born a male but identify as a female, and that wasn't really like a debate, let's say. But now you have these activists who are like, well, you can't say that they were born biologically male. And if you tell them that they can't use these restrooms, then that's oppressing them. And therefore, that's why we should have XYZ policy. So it's this kind of like, it's the whole victim narrative being applied for political gain or even social media clout. Like, look at me, I stand up for the oppressed. Yeah. So it's this whole ideology and phenomenon that's just kind of like spun out of control. But either way, it's like, you can be completely tolerant of trans people while also understanding that if you change a policy, like, should you be able to enter a women's restroom so long as you identify as a woman, the sad part is sexual predators take advantage of that. Yeah. And they start to say, oh, well, technically I'm abiding by the rules. I can do whatever the heck I want. And I'm pretty sure in the Planet Fitness situation, like this dude was like, it was proud to be in there. I believe didn't look like or dress like a woman at all. And I even believe was asking other women in the locker room to like rub lotion on him or something like that, where it's like, okay, I mean, it's sad that happened, but it's one example of why you shouldn't change the policies. And even in, I think, Scotland, they had a guy who had 2 rape convictions and basically said, well, I identify as a woman. And now you have the police and stuff where they're like, oh, what do we do here? And clearly normal people are going to be like, no, you don't put that person in a female prison. Yeah. But you have the social justice politicians who have been campaigning off this saying, well, technically we don't want to be considered transphobic. And then they put him in the women's prison. Yeah. So he actually ended up there. And he at least went the full 9 yards of wearing a wig and trying to dress like that. But it was like, clearly, he had never dressed that way. And it's just another example of like, if you change the policies to cater to a small fringe, you end up opening risk to a large amount of people, including women as a whole, Yeah.
Because I was going to say that was a big problem over even in Oregon Oregon, because Oregon has, as far as a lot of, with their correctional facilities, a lot of guys who either got child, what is it? Like they're child molesters and stuff, or
like the blue dots.
If they're going to go protective custody, PC. A lot of those guys would change or say they identified as a woman, so they were less of at risk of being like messed up or fucked with, whatever, while being in jail and stuff. So that's a big problem over even in Oregon right now. They've just opened the floodgates to that. So I don't know.
Well, it's one of those things where it's like, if you change the policy, you've created an incentive for people to do that. And it's like, can you blame the people for wanting to take advantage of that rule? It's like, no. I mean, it's the same thing with like the border, which, we'll get to at some point today, but it's one of those things where it's like, I don't blame people for migrating to the border if we say, if Joe Biden changes the border policy saying that you simply have to say I'm seeking asylum and therefore get granted in, no questions asked. I don't blame people for going and taking advantage of that, but the problem is the policy. It's like we need to change the policy to change the incentive. But when it comes to the whole Planet Fitness thing, I think like one of the main things that one of the biggest issues with that whole phenomenon is when a organization or a police department will say, oh, do we cater to the social justice activists or do we cater to what we believe makes sense and we had pre-established? Because rules were established to protect women, right? That's why men can't go into women's restrooms or men can't go on women's sports teams. And that's just was a default understanding to protect women, right? And women's spaces. But you have these people who are like, man, I've been campaigning off of social justice ideology. Like if I change my mind on this, all of a sudden my group of teenagers I've been catering to are going to call me transphobic. So, I don't want to tarnish, like imagine you're like the chief marketing officer at Planet Fitness and you're like, oh, well, I would get some really bad rep if I didn't do this pro-trans policy change. So, okay, I'm just going to do it anyway. And then boom, there's all these consequences of sexual predators coming in. So it comes down to like, it comes down to if you're a CEO of an institution and you're catering to these loud activists, like you're going to be censored and fired if you don't do what we say. And then you do what they say, you're giving in to the bad ideas that open up risk to people. So the CEO should be more responsible in not catering to their public relations lawyer telling them what they should or shouldn't say in public. It's like, have a backbone, basically.
Yeah.
So
I was going to say Planet Fitness lost about, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, like 400 million from just that whole thing. A bunch of people were boycotting and canceling their memberships, which is crazy too. Cause like, I'm not sure the last time you tried to go to like a commercial gym, but like trying to cancel the way they make trying to cancel your membership is like a fucking
impossible.
Yeah. They're like, oh, you got to show up and it's there. You can't do it over the phone. And then like, you got to talk to the general manager or whoever signed you up. And then hopefully they're working that day. And like, dude, they make it a whole hassle. So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it was the whole thing with like Bud Light. Remember how Bud Light a couple months ago? Remember that? I mean, they lost billions of dollars. It was fucking crazy.
I think they're on the comeback though, because
they are.
Shane Gillis is their new
spokesperson. Well, same with Dana White, who I'm a big Dana White guy. Yeah. He's one of those guys who's like, he doesn't give a fuck. Like he will curse, he will say whatever the hell he's thinking. He doesn't care about being sensitive or about catering to his, woke social justice marketing manager. Like he is his own person and speaks his own mind. But with the whole Bud Light thing, it was one of those things where enough people are kind of pissed about the whole trans, phenomenon. Again, not specifically at trans people, but the fact that we're changing all these policies and, women are losing their spots on teams and, the whole Riley Gaines swimmer situation. So people were pissed about the topic. And then all of a sudden, Bud Light, I think, hired a kind of social justice woman who was like leading their marketing department. And she was like, nope, I got hired because we need to get away from catering to the frat bros who drink our beer. And we want to be more of a inclusive, be more inclusive to wider groups of people, all the same social justice crap that people are like, you go girl. And they vote for her. And that's how she gains power. But Bud Light is a fucking traditional American brand. And, basically it's like you could try to justify catering to a small group and being inclusive, but again, you've pissed off the majority of your audience and buyers and all that stuff. And the whole thing with Bud Light was they gave like printed a popular trans, Dylan Mulvaney type of, social media figure. He did a couple commercials or something with it. And then people were just so pissed about it that they're like, all right, I'm boycotting Bud Light. And then boom, all these people voiced concerns about it. They basically said, all right, we're not drinking this beer anymore. Kid Rock's like shooting it, Bud Light with a fucking machine gun. Yeah. And then, clearly they lost billions of dollars. I think the marketing manager ended up quitting or resigning or whatever. And then Dana White, owner of the UFC, comes out and he's like, well, they're one of our premier partners. And I think they made a stupid mistake with the whole, transgender marketing, campaign. but they also spend millions of dollars on American veterans, and they spend millions of dollars on kids getting education, and they do all this patriotic stuff to where it's like, okay, you're right. It was kind of a bad decision, but they're a net positive for our society and are a pretty pro-American brand. And I would bet, and I don't know this, but I would bet the CEO came out and was like, that was a stupid mistake, and we are not doing that again. But I don't know.
Yeah.
So
what do you, okay, so you think with like all these big companies and stuff, you think they should stay out of politics or like not address any agendas or even attached to it? Because I know even Vivek talked about this with his biotech company, like where they'd wanted him to speak on BLM and like
why
the
he
deep
stepped down, right?
Yeah, and he's just like, "Oh, I'm not going to make a statement about that." And then they try to cancel him and like bring him down, and that's when he wrote that book about the deep state and all that stuff. But you think they should just stay separate from that, or you don't think they should take a stance on it?
I think they should be separate. Yeah, I mean, I think if you're someone like Nike, right, your whole thing is you're making awesome shoes and sports cleats and clothes and all this stuff. Is like, stick to that and pursue excellence, right? It's like you don't want to hear politics because imagine, and I think it was like there was a famous Michael Jordan quote from the 90s where he was like, even though he associated with the Democrat Party, he was like, well, Republicans buy sneakers too. Like, why would I want to piss off half of the country by catering to this group's, politics, and they're offering me money to do so and whatever. He's like, that would not be a smart business decision. And I totally agree. It's like, if you're a plumber, you shouldn't be saying politics or talking about politics, you know what I mean? Where it's like, just do a good job as a plumber, just do a good job as a nurse, as a doctor, whatever. And everyone's politics is their own decision, right? It's like, hey, we're, comfortable talking about this stuff out loud because we are well-intended individuals and we don't care if some social justice warriors are trying to cancel us for just saying our opinion on something. But when it comes to brands, yeah, they should absolutely just stick to doing a good job with the product they build or the service they provide and stay out of politics for sure.
Yes. With that whole Starbucks situation, what was that all about? Because I heard about the boycotts and everybody was like, oh, you shouldn't be buying like Starbucks or coffee. I'm not sure if you were following with that, but
no, I know people are, and that's the problem with the social justice activists is they're always looking for something to raise their fist in the air and say, tyrant, we need to get rid of these guys. And I don't know if it was something related to Israel, maybe, where I even saw that like McDonald's had a certain wrap around one of their sandwiches and it was like white and blue, and people were like, that's the Israeli flag, like down with McDonald's. You know what I mean? It's stupid. But and again, it's like these guys don't make any sense, and they have a certain ideology where when I always say social justice, like some people refer to it as woke, right? But it's that whole Marxism that I always talk about, where it's this oppressor versus oppressed narrative of, and these are the same people who are like, oh, we're on stolen lands, the natives should have their land back and all that. It's like this crazy stuff where it's like, it's really just a ideology for these people to be activists and wave their fists in the air and shout about something, and it gives them purpose, and it's them, it's false virtue. It's them saying, look how compassionate and virtuous I am by standing up for the oppressed.
Yeah,
and
also just virtue signaling.
It's virtue signaling, yeah. And there's a big distinction too, because it's like, and I always say that when it comes down to these, progressives and all this stuff, it's like 5% of them are the crazy activists. Those are the ones actually like going to school board meetings and like, no, drag queens should be able to dance in front of your kids. And it's like, what the fuck? And then the other 95% are usually just people who don't really care about politics, but they have good intentions. And they're like, well, I don't want anyone being oppressed. I don't want anyone who isn't capable of defending themselves to be attacked by someone who's more powerful. So it's like, we all have that spirit inside us, but we also have to understand that, organizations, even like Black Lives Matters, it's like, maybe it had a good intention to start with, and a lot of people had good intentions by advocating for the group, but then 1-2 years later, they find out that all the money they were just spending on themselves and like buying mansions and doing all this crazy shit. And you go on their website and they talk about like, down with the United States, down with the nuclear family, like, and they are open socialists and Marxists, and they like say that on their website. So it's like one of those things where it's like, on the surface, it sounds good, but then it ends up being this very toxic, kind of corrupt organization that ends up producing more harm for Black people or for trans people or for whatever the heck the social justice, movement is basically. But yeah, that's my thought.
Yeah, no, because I'd seen a podcast with a former drag queen, like way back in the, I think they're in the, this is the 90s or the early 2000s. And they were talking about how this new wave of all these drag queens and transgender movement, they took it too far. Like they were saying way back with the drag shows, if they ever saw a kid out there in the audience and stuff, they would stop the show, ask whose kid that was, and escort them out, or like have the parents take them out, because again, that's the whole purpose of that entertainment was 18 and up, whatever. This is like a show, so
it's like a striptease kind of show.
And they're like, we're losing these values, and they're trying to like that. Some of that stuff shouldn't be implanted into kids, and I did respect that, hearing that from, because you don't ever hear those types of takes from that side. So that was pretty cool for me to hear.
No, and that's a good point too, because it is like there's a lot of older gay people who are like, what the fuck's going on with this new pride? It's like, I'm not down for that. Like, I just want to be left alone. Like the old, gay rights movement used to be like, hey, live and let live. It's like, you do whatever the heck you want in your own household. You can marry whoever you want. It doesn't matter, right? Just leave me alone. Don't tell me what I can or can't do. That was the old school gay movement. The new school gay movement, and I put quotes on it because it really is just activists. You know what I mean? It's not real gay or trans people's opinions, some of them, but it's mainly these activists who are using it as a weapon to gain popularity and virtue signal and all this stuff. But the new school one is like, well, this is my identity and you have to accept it and affirm it. So it's not just like, hey, leave me alone. It's like, if you are not affirming my gender by using the pronouns I'm demanding you to, or letting me use the bathroom I'm demanding you to, then you are oppressing me, and therefore you are a bigot and you're transphobic and you know what I mean? And then it's like, what the heck? But I posted a clip recently on Dr. Phil, the comeback of D. Philly, as what I've been saying it. But he's been very vocal about all this crazy shit, because he's like, what the heck's going on here? And it's same with like the Israel stuff. But yeah, Dr. Phil, he did a small segment on the whole transgender medical scandal, is what we're now calling it, basically.
Oh, is that where like a lot of these like post-op, these people are coming back and talking about like how they were like almost coerced or like convinced, whatever, that there was something that they needed to change, or like, and then they regretted it years later and stuff? Or
absolutely, yeah. Those are the detransitioners. Yeah, and that was one of my earlier videos, but is one of the main reasons I talk about this stuff now. But basically, it's like the phenomenon is, you have 12-year-old girls. Most 12-year-olds are not comfortable with their bodies, even if they're completely normal individuals. Like every 12-year-old isn't comfortable with themselves, and they're awkward and all this stuff. And you get these girls who are like on social media 24/7 and are maybe not having enough social relationships. So for one reason or another, they're feeling depressed or anxious. Then they go to a, child therapist, which many of them are indoctrinated with the social justice ideology. And they're like, oh, no, you're actually just born in the wrong body. And they're like, oh, wow. And they start to feel good about themselves, because they're like, wow, like all this crappiness I was feeling inside me is solvable. Yeah, like there's a solution to this anxiety inside me. And like, I knew that I liked playing football with boys, and I knew I liked being rough. So like, I'm not just a gay woman, or whatever, or just a more masculine woman, right? It's instead, oh, I'm actually born in the wrong body. And then the worst part is, if they go out to their friends and they say, oh, refer to me as they, not she, then it's like, you go they, you know what I mean? And then it's like all this clout and like, boom, all these followers on social media, and, people are patting them on the back on how good of a victim they are. And
now they feel accepted finally. And there's this embracement. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. There was even they do like these college tours and stuff. It's like the same as like Change My Mind and stuff. Mm-hmm. But like they were going on campus and they were asking people, would you be comfortable with your daughter getting like tattoos at like 12 and stuff like that? And they were like, oh no, that's a permanent decision. And like, I don't want them to be making these types of body changes, whatever. And they're like, okay, well, would you be okay with hormone blockers? And they're like, oh yeah. And then like, it was funny, because it like, you'd hear later on in the responses, they were like, oh, it's not permanent. These are things that they could just stop taking and stuff. And it's like, you don't even understand how these things work, whatever. And you guys are, I don't know. It was, yeah.
Yeah. And that's exactly it. Right. And that's why it's like, many refer to it as a cult, technically, because it has a cult mindset, right? Where it's like, well, even though you're born with this set of biology and science, you are defying that and choosing your own body and choosing your own identification, all this stuff where it's like, it has cult, like, religious like tendencies in it, but at the end of the day, you have these 12-year-olds who are going in with normal problems. They go to these therapists, and instead of the therapist being like, okay, well, I'm not sure if you're born in the wrong body, like, how are your relationships at school? And a good therapist would be assessing, like, okay, hold on, let's not jump to any diagnosis. Like, the person doesn't come in and provide their own diagnosis. Is like they go to the doctor, and the doctor's supposed to kind of ask some questions and figure out what the real problem is, because you don't want to prescribe a solution to the wrong problem. You know what I mean? But the problem is, these kids come in, and then it's like, well, if you tell the kid no, you're denying their identity. You're denying their true selves. So like, that's, we can't have that. It's better to just affirm the kid. And that's where we get this term gender affirming care, where it's like, in reality, it's basically just saying, affirm their new identity and push them down the path of gender affirming care, which is puberty blockers as phase 1. So if you're born a female, you're going to, you don't want to go through the trauma of going through a female puberty. So we don't want to put the child through that. Well, okay, let's put them on puberty blockers and pause their puberty. It's like, it's not, they say pause because they argue it's reversible. It is not reversible. Now, and it has massive impacts on their body. Boom, puberty blockers is phase 1. Now they move them to cross-sex hormones. That's where they're actually giving testosterone shots to 12-year-old girls, which is absolute insanity. And then the third phase is the sex change surgeries, where they'll actually remove the girl's breasts. And these are minors, you know what I mean? So it's like, at the end of the day, it comes down to like, should children be able to consent to sex changes or sex change hormones or all that stuff? And no, they shouldn't, because they can't get a tattoo, because they can't drink or drive or do all this stuff that's potentially dangerous for them, or things that a child can't necessarily consent to. But because it's related to the trans subject, well, you're not supposed to talk about that. And because there's so much silencing and censorship about it, people don't know this stuff, and they get pushed down this path, and they are coerced into it. Because if you're talking to a doctor that gets paid, $1 million a year for doing all these types of surgeries and stuff, and before they were doing gender reassignment surgery, they weren't making as much money. It's like, these people are corrupted. Like, these people want you to go down that path. And you have these these social justice nonprofits that are like funding this stuff. And it's like, you start to voice against it, and then they start calling it like, oh, well, trans kids are being denied healthcare. Like, how many times have you heard that on the internet? A lot. But in reality, it's like, no, they're being told that they can't go through these sex change surgeries because so many of them are coming back and be like, what the heck? Like, I completely regret all of this. Like, my depression wasn't solved. My anxiety wasn't solved. Maybe they were sexually abused as a child and that wasn't discussed. Instead, they were told that, hey, this is your problem, and in the next 3 years, it'll be solved. But you just keep going down your path until you've been fully transitioned, and now you'll be your true self. And so it's cult mentality. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And the scary part too about that is some of these, it's viewed as child, not neglect, but abuse. If you don't supply your kid with, like, if your kid comes up to you and says, oh, I feel more like a girl, or I want to start going down hormone blockers, and you tell your kid they can't do that, that's now viewed as child abuse, and that you're neglecting their needs and helping them, or preventing them from seeking medical care and stuff.
Yeah. And you can have your kid taken away by the government. Isn't that scary? It's happening in Canada too.
Yeah. I think we should just push more towards like the metaverse. And so now these kids, they're adventuring into figuring out their identity can just be through an avatar. So I feel like that would be like an alternative to this, this kind of situation where it's like a temporary, solution to the problem.
Yeah.
Where without any permanent repercussions of like actual things that are biological, like affecting you.
Yeah. And I feel like what the few, because it is a newer phenomenon, and the few studies that are actually out there, they show that if you just, like, if a kid comes in and he says like, oh, I'm actually a girl, if you just do not take action at all, and then try to, again, help the kid build friends or play sports or do something healthy or just get off the freaking internet, it's like 80 to 90% of them just end up saying, oh, okay, yeah, that was just a phase. I'm actually just a gay guy. You know what I mean? Yeah. So it's like, now we're going down the path of like, if we just wait it out, most of them understand it's a phase, right? Because again, it was like, 0.01% of society had gender dysphoria before 2012, 2015. And now in some schools in progressive cities, you have like 40% of the entire school of the girls are saying that they're non-binary or something. It's like, okay, this is clearly a social contagion. But if you say that, the activists come in and call you transphobic. And there are people out there like Jordan Peterson, I think, was literally had his YouTube channel, his Twitter, his Instagram, all this stuff banned because he was talking about this stuff. So it's like, imagine you're a parent out there who's confused, like, what the hell? My kid came home from school and wants me to call them a different pronoun. Like, what? I've never experienced this before. Like, I love my kid. I want to be nice to my kid and compassionate, but I don't know about this stuff. You go on the internet and all it is affirm, affirm, affirm. And all the stuff that's like potentially critical is being censored and canceled. So it's like adding to the amount of victims, both children and unknowing, well-intended parents who are getting sucked into this ideology. And again, what Dr. Phil's been talking about is the doctors who are performing this stuff are fully aware that they don't have long-term studies here. They're fully aware that more and more kids are coming in with the same talk track of, yes, I feel more comfortable identifying as this. They know what to say because they're learning it online. They go in, get these surgeries, and then a couple months later, they're coming back begging the doctor to put their penis back on. It's like, wow, that's fucking insane. But more people are talking about it, which is a good thing, Yeah,
this is going to be an interesting time to look back on, like years, like 20 years from now, 10 years from now. Hopefully things pan out with like more discussion and stuff like this being talked about.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, that's good though that Dr. Phil's bringing this, like some of these detransitioners to speak about their stories and stuff.
Yeah, and there's I've been I'm a believer that with the whole October 7th, like Hamas attack on Israel and like everyone fighting about this, and now college kids are yelling gas the Jews, death to Jews. It's like, what the fuck's going on? More and more people who like didn't really care about politics and that's not even political necessarily. You know what I mean? Like gas the Jews, like it shouldn't be political, let's say, right? You shouldn't yell gas or death to anybody, right? But I think more people were like, what the heck's going on? And now more people are waking up to this woke ideology, this social justice, like hiding behind well intentions and compassion and stuff. But in reality, it's doing some pretty sinister stuff and having some pretty sinister outcomes. And the same thing goes on with the border. The same thing goes on with race relations, right? Like that's gotten worse over the years. And it's stuff like that like more people are thinking about it, talking about it, interested in it. So I think we are starting to see a little bit of a turnaround. And I personally think that if things go well, more people are going to start, voicing their concerns and being like, well, okay, I don't trust the media. I don't trust the Democrats. Like they've been lying to us about XYZ. I used to vote Democrat, but I just don't trust these guys anymore. And I think that's healthy, honestly. But that does bring me to the, one of the points I want to talk about, which, we're in the year 2024, major elections coming on at the end of the year. There's crazy shit happening all around us, like both with the trans stuff, the border stuff, wars overseas. Like what's been kind of your sense of all that?
I was going to say, elaborate more on the border. I'm not too familiar with all the stuff that's going on with the border right now.
Yeah. So basically for the border, like Joe Biden, so it depends on how you look at it, but the concrete evidence is Joe Biden changed a policy change that, I think Obama was pretty strict on the border, and then Trump was pretty strict on the border. But people hated Trump so badly that when Trump would say, no, we're going to be secure on the border, people would be like, well, no, that's cruel. That's racist. Like, no, we should have open borders. We should have this. So this whole phenomenon of being a open immigration society, open border type of society is the virtuous thing to do, which sounds crazy because you need a secure, closed border. But anyway, Joe Biden ended up changing a policy that said, if you simply say you're seeking asylum, you should be granted asylum. And that's crazy because people can go to the border and just be like, okay, I'm seeking asylum. Like people want to kill me in my country. Okay, well, we'll let you in then. Versus people who are actually fleeing war zones. You know what I mean? Like people like my mom fled Vietnam, that was an actual war zone, and was in a refugee camp for a year and then sought asylum. And it's like, she could have gone to Australia. She could have gone to the United Kingdom. She could have gone to France. She could have gone to, America. Fortunately, she came to America. But it was like, she sought asylum, and that's why the asylum policy is there. But Joe Biden changed it to where you don't actually have to be coming from a war zone. You could just simply say, my life is in danger, I'm seeking asylum. No background check, nothing.
I was gonna say, how are their don't we cover their health care and their all these things with our tax? Ooh, I can see it. Yeah, now I see where the issues are starting to come up, where it's like the taxes and like us funding some of their health care and shit like that.
And it's also like the amount of people, like the crazy part is the amount of people that have come across the border since, right? So you see all these videos in Mexico and in Colombia of like thousands of people migrating and walking, and they're like, we're going to America. Like, yeah, you know what I mean? And it's like, again, I don't blame these people because they're like, oh, like, you know, my family's been trying to get in legally and we're not able to. So if I just go to the border and say I'm seeking asylum, they will literally just let me in. So now I think it was like something like a 400% spike in the amount of people who have gone through the border. And I could have the statistic wrong, but it was something like, you know, you look at these graphs from like Obama, Trump, and then Biden, and it's like, what the fuck? And it was like millions of people. So I think it's like 8 million people in the past 3 years who have come across the border. Some were known terrorists that they stopped, but there's a lot of people who were known gotaways. So we don't know if they were terrorists coming in or not terrorists, or who these people are. But when they come in here, if you look in New York City, when you have all these like, we don't have anywhere to store the migrants, you know what I mean? Like there's millions of them. Like, what do we do? And they're all over the streets. And what happens if they go hungry? They're going to start stealing shit and mugging people and killing people. And that's why even on the whole Biden versus Trump, like, you know, recent speech, whatever that people were talking about, like, there was an illegal immigrant who killed a nursing student in Georgia, and people were pissed about it because they were like, this is why we said close the border. Like, this is why we need to have these border policies. And the scary part, in my view, of what's scariest is you have, I was watching this Jordan Peterson discussion with someone who went down to Colombia to see like, why are all these people flying in from all over the world to go to Colombia? And you look and it's people from Africa, from Asia, from all these places, you know, coming in, they got kids with them, they're poor, right? There's all this crazy stuff. But then there's also Chinese people who are living in these nicer hotels and coming in, they're all adult men. It's like, what the hell? And they're military age, early 20s, 30s, all this stuff. They're living in this nice segment. They don't talk to the news. They don't do anything. And they walk in with everyone else. So it's like, what the heck's that all about? So it's a security concern with the border. And the dangerous part is one policy change caused a massive spike in the amount of people coming in, and cartels and illegal organizations take advantage of that. So cartels are at the border basically saying, hey, you got to give us $5,000 if you want to go through. They're raping kids. They're fucking putting drugs in the kids, and like, oh, it's child smuggling back and forth.
I was going to say there was even an issue with, I forget what, somebody from South America, I think it was Ecuador or Guatemalan. He was making a TikTok video about, cause we have the,
squatter
thing. And he was like, oh yeah, you just have to, he was breaking down like how, to like fake a lease agreement or like some type of, or just even to go to some of these houses that are vacant for like, more, and you just have to sit there for at least 30 days or more, and you pretty much have squatter rights now. And then he was just walking them through the process and stuff, whatever. And that's scary, bro.
Dude, it's Democrat policies, man. It's the social justice policies. It's like, well, no, we need to be compassionate to everyone. We need to be, and then all of a sudden, the ideas don't make sense, and then they actually have catastrophic effects. Whether it's the squatter phenomenon, people coming to the border, and cartels literally taking women, taking children, you know, charging people $5,000 just to go through. And they're like dialing back on their drug distribution to bring in legally, technically, because it literally is legal, right? So it's like there's less risk to them to pay, to charge people money and bring them across the border compared to even bringing drugs across. And they're still doing drugs. But the crazy part is like there's unintended consequences to social justice policies. Squatters, the transgender phenomenon, all this crazy stuff. So like when it comes to like the election, you know, a year ago, I didn't really care about politics or any of that stuff. And then I just started seeing like all this crazy shit around me, started to try to do some research, hear both sides. And my view is like old school Democrats are not the same thing as the new school Democrats. Old school Democrats are separating themselves from the new school Democrats. And I'm posting videos on that because they're like, hey man, I don't mess with what the hell these guys are doing. Like, I'm a liberal, but I don't mess with, this whole trans thing, or like homelessness is out of control. The border's fucking crazy. So it's crazy, man.
But that's the scary part too, is even if we do get, like, let's say we were to get Trump for the next 4 years, that's still not enough time to make a big change. Like, even if you think about how quick 4 years goes by, like I said, even with this whole Biden administration, even that felt like that.
Yeah.
And my hope would be, like I said, I don't know who Trump's VP is going to be.
Yeah, I think there's like a few, top picks that people like, but I'm not sure if he's decided on what he's going to campaign with.
Yeah. But I think best case scenario, like I said, Trump, Vivek VP, and then Vivek taking up the next, 8 years after that. And that would be a good amount of time, 12 years, where we'd possibly see some really good changes with some of these policies, getting rid of some of these 3-letter agencies like the deep state. I think that's best case scenario as far as where America could be heading.
Yeah. No, I totally agree too. And the way I see it is like, I'm critical of a lot of the things that the Republican Party does too, but they are a lesser of two evils compared to the Democrat Party. You know what I mean? And one of the major differences too is like, so Vivek Ramaswamy, he was my number one pick. I still think he would have been the best candidate just in terms of his ideas and all this stuff, but the people want Trump, let's say. But people like him and other conservatives or Republicans are at least sitting on podcasts and having these long form discussions and like sharing what their views are, versus a lot of the Democrat folks. They won't go on podcasts. They won't do these long form interviews. Like, it's all cut, scripted, fucking, oh, make sure you ask me this, make sure, you know what I mean? So it's all this stuff where, or I guess back to Trump's VP pick. So one of the potential candidates is Tulsi Gabbard, if you've ever heard of her. She's like a Hawaiian politician that went and was a Democrat for a while. She is like Samoan American, it has the minority, card and all that type of stuff. And but she started voicing concerns against Obama, I believe. And then people were like, hey, you're not supposed to disobey him. You're not supposed to speak against him. And she's like, well, I'm critical of what he has to say on this. She's like, I'm a Democrat, but I can be critical of his policy on this or that. And then boom, they started pulling her away, and you know what I mean? She was like they were kicking her out, basically. They were silencing her. So she's came out as like an independent and has been doing podcasts and talking to people, and is like, they're corrupt. It's like the party's been taken over by radicals, and I don't mess with that anymore. And a lot of the policies they're pushing are harming people. So I was openly Democrat for the longest time, but I don't affiliate with that party anymore. So a lot of people think she could be a good VP pick for Trump because she pushes normal policies and non-radical stuff. Like, she's not going to be far right, but she's also not on the radical left, you know what I mean? So and she's a woman that attracts people, but I like her a lot. I think she's saying a lot of good stuff and has been, like I said, doing podcasts and actually like sharing what she knows and doesn't know. So I think she could be a really good pick if Vivek doesn't run.
Yeah. That's the scary thing about the whole news, or like with these parties, as far as who they pick for representing them. It has to kind of fit the image. Like, even Vivek talked about, it wasn't his skin color or anything that hurt him. It was more so the religion, being Hindu.
Yeah.
But that's the sad part. But because we still have the older generations who rely mostly on the news and stuff for where they source their information and where they see their values. And they move towards more Christian values, and that's how they see America being represented. But what I hope for these younger generations, as we get more people to vote, and as we start to become the majority who controls this, is even opening up the idea to even write-ins, like because I know you still have your two parties, but there's the whole idea too. You can even write in your votes too, and if we got more support around some of these people who aren't in the two popular
like
parties,
independents.
If we got more people to start voting more that way, we could pretty much destroy this powerhouse between these two things, and I think it would be more. We would get more. I feel
we have more
better
options.
Yeah.
It's like we have more freedom to choose, right? Versus because I totally agree, right? Because I know there's people like RFK, if you've heard of him. He's basically running as independent. He's another situation where, JFK, the president from the 60s, this is his nephew. So he's from the Kennedy family. Like, these guys are like powerful Democrats, right? But he basically has now separated himself from the Democrat Party because at the beginning when it was like, oh, is it going to be Trump and Biden again? Like, what the hell? Like, what the fuck? Like, we don't want to, we don't want these two again. They're so old and whatever. We have our criticisms. So RFK was coming in and trying to run as a Democrat candidate. And basically all the existing Democrat politicians were like shutting him out, censoring his podcasts and like removing his stuff from the media. And he was like, what the hell? And he's like, all right, even though my family's done so much for this party over the past few decades, and I considered myself a lifelong Democrat, like they are kicking me out of this group and they're not allowing the people to choose. Like they want Biden because they can prop him up and he will do whatever they say. Remember what I was talking about with Bud Light, where it was like, well, no, we got to do this and we got to say that.
Yeah.
That Joe Biden will say that stuff. He'll do that stuff. He doesn't think for himself. Like he's propped up. And even if you look at his politics over the past few decades, he's like was a pro-segregationist, and then now all of a sudden claims to stand for the black community and all the. It's like it's super annoying, man. But again, it comes down to, and there's people on the left. There are other Democrat candidates who aren't in the running and stuff who don't like the existing Democrat Party, and they're free speakers and they'll do podcasts and they'll talk about stuff. And like you and I were even talking about like Ben Shapiro, debating Destiny, right? And I was like, I have a lot of respect for Destiny, even though I may not agree with a lot of the stuff he's saying, but he will go out there and have discussions with people to argue his points, accept he was wrong in some areas, change his mind a bit. He's a free thinker. And in my view, people like that are separating themselves from the Democrat Party too, because it's like, okay, 12-year-olds consenting to chop their wieners off is fucking gnarly. Like I can't support that, So I'm big on free thinkers, left or right. I think it's important to have free thinkers and have them literally engage in open dialogue, talk about the border, talk about drug policies, and that's the best way to understand what makes the most sense and what doesn't. But the problem is people are in their echo chambers on social media and they only look at pro-Trump stuff or they only look at social justice stuff. And it's like, then you start to hate the other side and nothing gets done. Nothing's productive. People aren't talking to each other. So that's why podcasts have been so popular. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to start one, because it's like most of us agree on most things, right? It's like the radical fringes that make us think that we don't. But in reality, we do,
Yeah.
So... yeah, but I know for at least in terms of like the upcoming election, like I'm pretty, I try to be neutral as best I can, but like I think the Republican Party is the lesser of two evils. I think, I'm critical of Trump in many ways, but I think that people like Vivek Ramaswamy, it's like if you're trying to get a grasp of like what problems are happening around us or what's kind of like a logical outlook on culture and all that stuff, like I think Vivek's probably the best example, and he's actually going on leftist media and actually debating his points and like arguing with people about it. So I like the guy. Yeah. What would you say? So in terms of, I know we were talking about the whole trans thing and Planet Fitness and stuff, like you as a California resident, and person who's been born and raised here, like what do you feel? Do you feel like there's any major problems that you see out in society? I know last time we were even talking about how kids need to just go outside and touch some grass and get that, get some fresh air. But what would you say is like top of mind as a California citizen?
I think our biggest issue right now would be, I'm not too sure, to be quite honest with you. It's
how do you feel about like all the whole race relations? Because I feel like,
what do you mean when you say race relations?
Like people, like I think we can both agree that people will use like racism as like the reason why there's an issue over here, an issue over there. And it's kind of like they're doing it too much, honestly. They're overusing it.
Yeah, no, that feels like it's like a tired excuse or to always point back to race. I feel like we've grown as a country far from these issues. Like if you think back as far as equality or like more opportunities and stuff, there's more opportunities now than there was 20 years ago. Even them getting rid of some of the affirmative action, I was never opposed to that.
Yeah.
Or reversing the ruling on that. because I do feel like the best candidate should get it regardless, race, gender, whatever the issue is. We shouldn't be trying to meet a quota and stuff, because that's not how we're going to advance ourselves as a nation.
Yeah.
But no, I think it's a stupid. I shouldn't say stupid, but it's hurting us as like, well, I should say as a mixed or biracial American citizen. I think it hurts the black community when we fall back on saying, "Oh, racism," or victim. It's playing into the victim mentality.
Yeah.
And I think, but I've noticed even like a big growing of black Republicans and some of these people who are free thinkers and stuff, and that's really cool to see that. Like, and even some of these people even doing podcasts and stuff and speaking on it, because then it's opening more. Because I was always taught, even growing up, is well, not taught, but like you feel an obligation to vote Democrat, or to, and that's where, because Democrat would fund or help more of the minority families and stuff with welfare, some of these things. So you felt
like they had your back.
Yeah. So like, and it's interesting and cool to see now these black Republicans explaining how, no, that's actually been hurting us more, and we're not making any progress as we feed into these things. And they're, in fact, getting you to marry the government or rely on the government too much to where you're going to be dependent on them for the rest of the life. So you're hurting yourselves. Yeah. So it's cool to see some of these black Republicans and stuff speak out and stuff about some of these issues.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of, I always talk about Thomas Sowell. You know, he's a black Republican. He's, probably one of the first black conservatives that people really knew about, because he was talking about this shit since the 60s. Yeah. He was like, he's an economist, right? So it's like, anytime you see an hour of him talking, it's like, here's the data, motherfuckers. You know what I mean? It's like, you can look at it this way or look at it that way, but the data suggests this, So he was, and I posted a clip recently, but, people were talking about how, the reason why there's so many issues in the black community is because of, Jim Crow policies and slavery and all this stuff. And Thomas Sowell was like, well, after World War II, especially the black community, everyone was getting better, right? It was like, war is over. We're starting to spend money on economic development. More people are getting higher paying jobs. And it's like, you start looking at, I think he has a few statistics on this, but in terms of like overall income level, all this stuff, but also homicide rates. So he was talking about how in the 40s, homicide rates went down from 1940 to 1950, homicide rates went down like 22%. And then from 50 to 60 went down another 18%. And then, things were getting better. And then boom, introduction of the welfare state and progressive policies and all this stuff. And then homicide rates went up 89%. Yeah. And it was like, what the fuck? And he was talking about, the progressives back then, the social justice folks. He was like, yeah, like they had these whole light on crime ideas where it was like, well, there's only higher murder rates in the black community because, they were held back from racism, and, it's not fair if they're stealing food because they're hungry and then they go to jail for that and all this stuff. So, we should be arresting less. Like, it's the whole race quota. It's like, well, we want to arrest less black people, so let's just arrest less black people. It's like, what the hell? And then what's the consequence of that? Less police in the neighborhoods. Yeah. People aren't having consequences to doing crimes. Boom, homicide and murder rates go up by dozens. And who gets hurt the most? The black community. The people who are out there, the single moms who are like working 3 jobs, trying to raise their kids, and like have to worry about, have to put their kids in the bathtub at night so they're not getting hit by stray bullets. It's crazy, dude. And it's like, you look at movies, I always talk about this, but movies like Boys in the Hood or Menace to Society, or even like, those are, in my view, like progressive hellholes. It was like, that literally are progressive policies applied to those communities, and they just turn into gun zones, you know what I mean? Where it's like, it's crazy. But again, it's like, there are ideas that make those concepts worse and ideas that make those concepts better. And I think that the black conservatives have been doing a good job voicing the fact that the Democrat Party and these progressive ideas are in fact making much more problems, not only for the black community, but for fucking everybody. They're making things worse. So
yeah, I 100% agree.
Yeah. And Larry Elder too, I talk about. He's a 72-year-old black conservative, but he was on the Breakfast Club like a couple months ago. I think I sent you the video on it. But he talks about that too, where, Charlemagne was asking him, and he's like, oh, so, you have all this criticism of the black community, but why don't you talk about white people? And he's like, well, because we have to get our own shit in order. And we can't just, every problem we have, we can't just say it's the white man's fault or that it's America's fault. It's like, at some point, we do have to help our kids go to school. We do have to prevent them from, doing crimes. We do have to keep fathers in the household. And he's like, went in guns blazing.
I think that was the same interview where they're even talking about like how would you even fix some of the education system in some of these failing like schools like in Chicago and stuff.
Yeah.
And it's like you can't keep throwing more money at it because it's not going to fix the problem, or like offering more resources at some of these schools, because some of these kids aren't, like I said, they have no structure at their homes, whatever they're going to. They don't have a parent that's going to hold them accountable, or like even the presence. I love that point, the whole keeping the nuclear family together.
Yeah.
Because you don't really think of how it's not stressed enough how important that father figure role is when you have a dad around present. Even in the worst case scenario, like obviously like you have somebody who's going to hold you accountable, or somebody to look up to as a role model, like having your dad, making sure that you're doing your homework and stuff like that. So
curfew.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think it's really important to keep the nuclear family together.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I've been talking about this, but I feel like, like this new wave of black conservatives, and I forgot to mention, so I went down the freaking rabbit hole on South Africa. So South Africa, they run into a lot of the same problems we are. They have an election coming up this year. But it was just funny because I met one of my buddies, Lieben. He's 62. He is born and raised South Africa. He's a white guy, served in the military. He's been there his whole life. His family's been there for a while. Met him at a work conference a couple months ago and just hit it off talking about all this stuff. And it's kind of like they have their own social justice movement combating their conservative traditional movement. And they have their own version of the Democrat Party. It's called the ANC. I can't remember what it stands for, but like African National something. But that's their version of the Democrat Party, where it's like, no, we stand up for the oppressed. We do this, all while they're doing fucking corrupt stuff. And like, their whole campaign is on former apartheid and racism. And it's like, no, murders happening in this black community because of racism, 25 years ago. And it's like they're running off these racial grievances. And if you look at who's actually voting for the ANC, it's very wealthy white people, and higher, academics, they're PhD people. Same shit as here in the United States, where you have your Harvard grads and your president of Harvard saying all this crazy social justice woke stuff. It's the same shit over there. So it's almost like, in my view, it's a problem of like this hyper affluence, right? Where you live in such a cush little environment, and you didn't really have to work hard for anything and all this stuff, and you want to virtue signal to the world that you're compassionate, so you start to vote for this party that's running on all these social justice slogans, you know what I mean? And then all while they are putting racial quotas against white people and doing this and all this crazy shit, that the same stuff we're having. And they have their own conservative party too, who's like, hey, that has white people and black people who are like, hey, we don't like the victim mindset. We want economic development. We think that fathers should be in the home. We think it's like the same crap. So it's just funny to see that the similarities between the two, and the fact that certain parties can run off of these racial grievances and equality for all and equity and diversity, and then boom, all while they're making things worse for the economy. They're leading to more murder and rape and all this crazy shit, but it's all hiding behind good intentions. You know what I mean? Yeah. So I don't know, but I guess maybe one last question would be, so we talked about, kind of how we feel about like race relations and all that stuff. What would you say for younger? So we were talking about how a lot of people, they only get their information based on the news, right? Older folks, whatever. But yet nowadays we have younger folks who are getting all their news from like TikTok and stuff. What would you say for a teenager out there who is interested in politics, or maybe not interested in politics, but has a yearning to be involved in their community, like what kind of advice would you give for them about all this crazy shit?
Talk to people, have conversations. I mean, open dialogue is going to be the best way where you can kind of form an opinion or keeping an open mind and hearing both perspectives. And then it kind of helps shape you how you want to tackle some of these issues, because when you hear, the more dialogue you have, you'll hear more solutions, more suggestions as far as how we should approach some of these social dilemmas or issues. I don't know. Yeah, just not to fall into some of these traps as like these clickbaits or some of these, clickbaits to get for like a reaction and stuff. And be very careful of like I said, this social virtuing, because it happens everywhere too. Not even just in on the news or even in politicals, but even comedy. Some of these the really good comedians, if you follow them like Andrew Schultz or some of these guys, you can never really tell when they're telling a joke, when they're tackling some of these issues, which side they stand on. And that's usually what I like, when they're jumping from back and forth from both angles.
Making fun of both.
Yeah, both sides. Because then in a way, you kind of see both sides and can kind of laugh at it. And then also in your way, you're also embracing the issue and then forming your own opinions too on it.
Yeah. I love it, man. Well, until next time, we'll talk about a few more topics and do another discussion. But like I said, I think the important thing is just people have conversations, and you and me have been good friends for a long time. It's like, why not talk about this stuff? Show younger people that don't be afraid to speak your mind and share your opinions, and fuck the activists. You know what I mean? So appreciate it, brother.
Thank you, man. Thank you again.
Sweet.